The first moment something cracked wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream or an argument or the slamming of a door. It was quiet, so quiet, it almost went unnoticed. It happened on Thanksgiving, right in the middle of dinner at the dining table Marion Foster had once called her own. The cranberry sauce hadn't even stopped wobbling when her daughter-in-law Brooke leaned across the table, gently took the serving spoon out of Marion's hand and said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "You've had enough, Grandma." Everything froze, the forks mid-air, the clatter of conversation. Even the baby in his high chair, usually babbling and banging his hands on the tray, went completely still, as if he too understood that something unspoken and sacred had just broken. Marion didn't say a word. She glanced to her son Andrew, hoping foolishly for some kind of reaction. A look, a shrug, anything. But Andrew kept his eyes low focused on his wine glass, like it held the answer to all the world's tension. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He didn't defend her. Brooke calmly set the spoon down beside the mashed potatoes, like she'd just done something noble. She wiped her hands on a monogrammed napkin and leaned back with a fresh pour of wine into Andrew's glass. "Some of us still have an appetite," she said with a light laugh that bounced around the room and landed flat. Marion folded her napkin in her lap, slowly, neatly. Her hands were trembling, but she doubted anyone noticed. She adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan with care, as if she'd just remembered something still in the oven. "Excuse me?" she said softly, standing up from the table. No one stopped her. No one called after her. She walked away from the table, her table, the one she and George had saved up to buy sanded, stained, and rebuilt over the years. Down the hallway with the moss-green walls she'd painted herself after Andrew's wedding. Past the family portraits that had once lined the walls, but were now replaced with modern mirrors. Into the kitchen, where the soft hum of the dishwasher filled the silence that had followed her like a second shadow. She opened the back door. The crisp November air hit her face. She didn't cry. She just stood there and breathed, her fingers gripping the doorframe. She couldn't even say she was shocked. It wasn't just about the spoon. It was everything the spoon represented: permission, dismissal, control. This house had been her greatest act of love. Not a gift wrapped in a bow, but one built in drywall floorboards and sacrifices. 30 years of teaching public school clipping coupons, patching things instead of replacing them. She and George had bought the house when Andrew was 7. It was never fancy, but it was solid, and it held every memory worth remembering. When Andrew married, Brooke Marion wanted to give them a good start, so she let them move in. At least that's the version they told at parties. But deep down, Marion had known better. And standing there with the cold air on her skin and the sound of laughter behind her, she felt something shift inside. Not rage, not grief, just clarity. Something steady, something sharp. And for the first time in years, Marion Foster knew exactly what she had to do. It didn't all happen at once. If it had, maybe Marion would have noticed sooner. But that's not how erasure works. It's quiet, subtle. It creeps in like mildew, slow, steady, and easy to miss until it's everywhere. At first, things still felt okay. Brooke redecorated, of course. Marion had moved into the guest suite with the lilac wallpaper she'd picked herself back when the room was meant for visiting grandkids. They had what Marion thought was an understanding they'd live in the house, and she'd still have a place in it. A shared home. A family home. That was the deal. But 7 years passed, and somewhere between the new marble backsplash and the silent glances at dinner, Marian realized something had shifted. The house no longer felt shared. It was theirs now, Brooke's, really. And she was just someone lucky enough to still be allowed in it. That's when the changes started showing up in sharper ways. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady, like pencil lines being erased a little more each day. One morning, her old walnut bookshelf disappeared from the hallway. It had held her favourite poetry and her late husband, George's worn paperback novels. In its place, a chrome and glass shelving unit filled with colour-coordinated vases and books no one had ever cracked open. Marian asked once softly where her shelf had gone. Brooke smiled and said, "We're trying to modernise the space. It was too dark and bulky." Then the quilt from her and George's honeymoon vanished from the foot of her bed. Brooke claimed it was too tattered and said she donated it. The framed photo from Andrew's 3rd birthday, the one with frosting smeared on his cheeks, was replaced with some abstract painting that looked like TV static. Even the way the house smelled changed. It used to be cinnamon-brewed coffee, sometimes a little lemon oil on the baseboards. Now it was all lavender disinfectant and eucalyptus candles Brooke ordered from some influencer's blog. Just upgrades, Brooke would say. We're elevating the space. But it wasn't just the stuff. It was the language, too. Brooke stopped calling it our home. She started saying things like the renovation my kitchen and the guest suite. Marian's suite became the back room. The thermostat password got changed. Her favourite tea stopped showing up in the pantry. Furniture was rearranged without a word, and every now and then just loud enough for the neighbours or the Amazon guy to hear, Brooke would say things like, "Not every 70-year-old gets to live rent-free in a house like this." She should be grateful. Marian didn't argue. She never raised her voice. But she noticed, and she started writing it all down. She kept a yellow legal pad in the drawer of her nightstand, tucked under a book she pretended to be reading. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "What they think I don't notice." Each line was dated. Every entry had a note. When the quilt disappeared, when her Radin chair went missing, when Brooke replaced her garden tools, when Andrew didn't say a word. Marian wasn't keeping score out of spite. She wasn't even angry, at least not in the traditional way. Years of teaching taught her this. When someone tries to rewrite your presence, the first thing you hold on to is the truth. The second is proof. So she watched, and she documented, not to scream about it, but to prepare. Because something told her this wasn't just about decor or dynamics anymore. This was about control. And if they thought she'd just fade into the background, they were wrong. Marian Foster might have been quiet, but she wasn't invisible, and she sure as hell wasn't finished. Marian didn't wake up one day and decide to fight. That wasn't how she operated. She wasn't dramatic by nature, never had been. She was practical, steady, the kind of woman who folded her laundry as soon as it came out of the dryer and labelled her leftovers with masking tape and a Sharpie. But once she understood that what was happening wasn't just inconsiderate, it was intentional, something shifted. She stopped hoping Brooke would change or Andrew would speak up. Instead, she started planning. The yellow legal pad wasn't enough anymore. Marian bought a large binder, black zippered with thick rings and clear sleeves. Then came the tabs: financial manipulation, medical interference, unauthorized access, and so on. Each divider felt like a lifeline. Not just records, but evidence. Not for drama, for defense. She started collecting receipts, the ones Brooke had tossed from the pharmacy, when Marian's medication plan was suddenly updated. Marian fished them out of the trash, highlighted the discrepancies, and circled copays she never approved. She printed emails too, like the one Brooke sent to the insurance company changing the mailing address to her own inbox. She took photos of missing items, her reading chair, her mother's brooch, even the old garden tools that had quietly disappeared from the shed. And then there was the clock. It had been George's favourite mantel clock, nothing fancy, just an old brass piece with a slightly crooked tick. Marian hollowed it out and placed a small camera inside. Just one. She didn't need a dozen. One quiet truth delivered at the right moment would be enough. She kept the camera's footage on a flash drive stored inside a ceramic vase on the top shelf of her closet, tucked behind her old scarves. Every couple days she'd transfer clips and label them neatly. Not because she liked being sneaky, but because she had to be. When someone is slowly erasing you, staying visible means being smart. Then she started playing along on purpose. If they wanted her to seem forgetful, fine. She let her grocery list end up in the freezer, burned a batch of toast, forgot the neighbour's dog's name. Nothing big, just enough to build a picture. She wore her cardigan inside out one day and let her phone ring on silent, claiming she didn't hear it. Brooke noticed, of course. Hovered more, talked slower, louder. "You okay, Marian?" she asked one morning, cocking her head like she was examining a museum piece. "You put sugar in the salt jar again." Marian blinked slowly. "Oh dear," she said with a soft smile. "Must be my age." Later that same day, a sticky note appeared on the fridge in thick Sharpie. "Don't forget your memory meds." The smiley face had devil horns drawn on it. Marian peeled it off, folded it in half, and slipped it into the binder under psychological undermining. Not long after she made an appointment with Dr. Patel, a neurologist Deborah, her lawyer and old friend, had recommended. She didn't tell a soul, drove herself, sat through hours of memory tests, logic games, and reaction time drills. She passed every section with calm focus and a clear head. At the end, Dr. Patel smiled and said, "Your cognition is excellent. No signs of decline whatsoever." Marian asked for it in writing. 3 copies. So when Brooke slid a manila envelope across the kitchen counter one evening and said, "Just some power of attorney stuff." Standard. Marian smiled. She picked up the pen, held it between her fingers, then gently set it down. "I'd like someone to review it first," she said, "just in case my memory's slipping." Brooke didn't smile back, but Marian did, because now she wasn't just collecting evidence, she was collecting time, and every page in that binder said the same thing. You underestimated the wrong woman. Marian hadn't been snooping. She was just looking for her mother's old carving knife, the one with the bone handle and slight chip near the hilt. They'd used it every Thanksgiving since 1978, slicing turkey, while George poured wine and Andrew tried to sneak the skin when no one was looking. It was always stored in a cedar box in the back of the garage beneath a stack of old tablecloths. But when she opened the box this time, the knife wasn't there. In fact, most of what she expected wasn't there. Instead, wedged under a pile of Brooke's half-abandoned decor projects and cracked faux pumpkins, was an envelope taped to a thick appraisal folder. The handwriting on the label wasn't Marian's. The signature at the bottom definitely wasn't either. Her stomach tightened. She sat on an old cooler hands steady, despite the cold cement floor pressing against her feet, and started reading. Inside were photographs, her jewellery, her pearl brooch, the locket George gave her after Andrew was born. Each photo was paired with a handwritten inventory sheet, descriptions, estimated values, and at the bottom, signatures authorising their sale. Her name. Forged. Clean, confident strokes that mimicked her handwriting enough to fool anyone who didn't know her well. But Marion knew. She knew exactly how her G's looped and her R's curled. And this was not her. She didn't scream, didn't slam the folder shut or storm back into the house. She just sat there quiet and still letting it wash over her. It wasn't even disbelief anymore. It was confirmation. A calm, simmering recognition that Brooke wasn't just trying to erase her, she was selling her off piece by piece, like the house was already hers to inherit. Marion pulled out her phone and took photos of every page. Close-ups, wide shots, angles with her fingers just barely in frame to prove she'd touched it. Then she scanned everything onto her computer and printed hard copies for her binder. She flipped to a new tab, one she hadn't expected to need quite so soon: forgery and theft. That night, she didn't bring it up. She didn't mention the missing knife. Instead, she rolled out her pie dough like she'd done every year, humming softly to herself. Her hands moved with muscle memory, weaving the lattice top just the way George liked it tight, but not too perfect. The house smelled like cinnamon and slow consequences. Later, while the oven warmed the kitchen and Brooke scrolled on her phone across the room, Marion walked outside with a small trowel. In the back garden, now covered with gravel where roses used to bloom, she dug a shallow hole beneath the biggest flat stone and buried a waterproof flash drive. Packed tight with screenshots, scanned signatures, time-stamped clips, and silent truths. From the outside, the garden looked dead. But Marion knew better. She wasn't just burying data, she was planting something. Something that would outlast them all. Thanksgiving morning arrived wrapped in thick fog. The sky and the ground blurred together like the world was holding its breath. Marion was up before anyone else, before Brooke's blender, before Andrew's podcast. Her dress was already laid out, the deep, plum velvet one, with long sleeves, the one George used to say made her look like royalty. She'd ironed it the night before, hung it with care. Today wasn't just another holiday. It was a day she'd been preparing for longer than anyone in that house realized. In the kitchen, Brooke was already in performance mode. Hair-curled lip gloss, shining apron tied tight over a sleek yoga set. She took one look at Marion's outfit and smirked. "Well, that's a bold choice," she said. "We're hosting, not haunting." Marion smiled softly. "Then I'll be quiet as a ghost." By early afternoon, the house buzzed with guests, neighbours, colleagues. Brooke's Pilates friend with the fake laugh and oversized camera. Marion moved through the kitchen quietly, checking the turkey, busting it just right, minding the timer. She nodded politely when someone complimented the pie. She smiled when they mentioned the stuffing. She didn't offer more than a word or two, not because she wasn't proud, but because she was focused, calm. Every detail was exactly where it needed to be. At 5 o'clock, sharp, the meal was served. The table was full golden stuffing cranberry sauce with orange zest green beans with toasted almonds. The pie cooled by the window like a quiet witness. Marion took her seat at the far end of the table, the seat where the matriarch once sat. but where she now felt more like a piece of old furniture no one quite knew what to do with. As the meal went on, small talk floated around like steam. Brooke held court chatting about renovation plans that hadn't even been approved. Andrew stayed quiet, eyes fixed on his plate. The baby sneezed. Someone passed a napkin. It felt almost normal until it wasn't. Marion reached for a second helping of potatoes. Halfway to the bowl, Brooke's hand shot out grabbing the serving spoon, with fingers that looked graceful but felt like a slap. "You've had enough, Grandma," she said, wearing that same stretched smile from the year before. The room fell silent. Forks froze. Chewing slowed. Brooke let out a small laugh and added, "She's watching her starches remember doctor's orders." Marion didn't flinch, didn't look away. She set her fork down gently and picked up her wine glass, letting the stem rest between her fingers. She took a slow, steady breath. Then she stood up. Her chair scraped against the wood floor, loud, deliberate. All eyes turned. "Actually," she said, her voice smooth and clear, "I haven't even started." Right on cue, the doorbell rang. A man in a black coat stepped inside, holding an envelope. "Marion Foster?" he asked. Brooke blinked, confused. "That's her. I'm a registered process server." "You've been formally served," he said, placing the envelope directly into Brooke's hands. The room froze. Andrew stood so fast his chair tipped backward. "What is this?" Marion took a sip of wine, still calm. "Oh, just something I've been cooking a little longer than that turkey." By sunset, the house had emptied. Guests scattered with awkward hugs and mumbled goodbyes. Forks sat abandoned mid-bite. The pie was untouched. Brooke had locked herself in the guest bathroom. Andrew stood in the corner, staring at the eviction notice like it was written in a foreign language. Marion didn't speak again that night. She didn't need to. The law had spoken for her. And finally, so had she. Marion thought the worst was behind her. After all, the locks had been changed. Brooke was gone. The house was hers again, quiet, steady, filled with her scent, instead of Brooke's lavender disinfectant. But peace, as she learned, sometimes has a delayed cost. 2 weeks later, a letter came by certified mail. It was crisp, smug, and heavy in a way that made her stomach drop. Filed by Andrew Foster, her son. Not Brooke this time. Andrew. It was a legal petition contesting the revocable life estate. He wanted control of the house. He was suing her. She stared at the envelope for a long time at the kitchen table, the same spot where she used to pack his school lunches, tie his shoes, check his homework. Her only child. The same boy who once cried because he forgot his lunchbox in 2nd grade. The same boy who used to help her rake leaves without being asked. And now he'd hired a lawyer to try and take the last thing she still called hers. When the court date came, Marion dressed with quiet intention. Navy blue suit, soft scarf, and the locket George had given her, tarnished but still intact. Deborah Lane, her longtime friend and attorney, sat beside her. Across the aisle, Andrew looked stiff in a borrowed-looking suit beside a young woman in slate grey who never looked up from her notes. Marion didn't bring documents to flip through. She brought her binder, and her memory, and her voice. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and hair like brushed steel, called Marion's name. She rose without hesitation. No trembling hands, no uncertainty. "I gave my son and his wife this house," she said calmly, clearly, as a gesture of love. "Not a surrender of rights. Not an invitation to be erased from the life I helped build." She paused. Let the silence settle like a weight. I've lived through caretaking, through gaslighting disguised as concern. I've been told I was forgetful while they slowly wrote me out of every room, but I am not gone. I am not fragile, and I am not finished. The courtroom didn't gasp. It just held still like it was listening harder than usual. The judge turned to Andrew. "Do you wish to speak?" He stared down at the table, then muttered, "No, Your Honour." The decision came faster than Marian expected. The documents were upheld. The petition denied. Full rights retained. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just let out the faintest breath, like she'd been holding it for far too long. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Deborah handed her a cup of coffee. "You're free," she said. And this time, Marian actually believed her. The house didn't feel empty after the trial, it felt full. Not with noise or clutter, but with presence, with peace. Marian moved through it differently now, slower maybe, but with purpose. She polished the floors herself, rehung the family photos that Brooke had taken down, and restained the dining chair Brooke once called too dated. It was the chair Marian had sat in for every Thanksgiving since Andrew was 10. She ran her hand along the curve of the wood, remembering how George used to joke that it squeaked in rhythm with her sighs. She wrote a check, $50,000, made out to the local Women's Legal Defense Fund. She handed it to Deborah one afternoon with a smile. For the next woman, she said, who refuses to be erased. That Thanksgiving, Marian didn't host family. She invited a different kind of gathering. 12 women sat around her long table. Some came from the women's shelter down the street. Others were students from her adult literacy class at the library. They brought homemade biscuits, green beans with too much pepper and cranberry sauce with orange peel and cinnamon. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, real. No one talked over anyone else. No one reached across a plate without asking. They passed dishes gently like they knew each person at the table carried something fragile. A young woman, just 25 and newly sober, placed a small bouquet of wildflowers beside Marian's plate. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Marian raised her glass, the same one Brooke once tried to snatch out of her hand. Its rim was slightly chipped now, but whole. She didn't raise it for a toast, just in recognition. "This table didn't always feel like mine," she said, voice steady, "but I carved it back, inch by inch, not for revenge, for peace." There was a pause, then a quiet ripple of applause. Not loud, just enough. Outside the patio doors, the roses had started blooming again, deep red, bright yellow, and one stubborn ivory bush that refused to die. Marian had named that one Eleanor. It leaned toward the sun like it knew where it belonged. And for the first time in years, Marian didn't feel watched. She felt seen. She didn't need to be heard. She was home. Sometimes the deepest strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from standing quietly, steadily, and refusing to be erased. Marian's story reminds us that growing older doesn't mean fading away. It means living with wisdom, with memory, and with a quiet kind of power that doesn't need permission to exist. She didn't seek revenge. She sought respect. And through patience, planning, and self-respect, she reclaimed not just her house, but her voice, her dignity, and her place in the world. For many older adults, especially women, there's a familiar ache in being overlooked, talked over, or made to feel like they no longer matter. But this story reminds us that presence is power, and we all deserve to be seen, not just remembered. It's never too late to reclaim what's yours, whether that's your space, your story, or your peace of mind. No one can take away your worth, not if you remember it for yourself first. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What kinds of stories would you like us to explore next? Don't forget to like the video if it touched you. And please subscribe so you won't miss future episodes filled with powerful, heartfelt stories just like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself. You matter. You are not invisible, and you are never alone.